We spoke to Carlos Cuerpo, Spain's economy minister, who was in Brussels to ask the EU for help concerning the devastating floods that happened in Spain on October 29th. Cuerpo said Spain would do whatever it takes to rebuild the damage. And he also said that responsibilities for the management of the floods would need to be determined. Carlos Cuerpo, you are Spain's Minister of Economy, Trade and Business. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So you met with European commissioners in Brussels to negotiate EU funds to help Spain recover from the devastating floods that happened last month. So, Carlos Cuerpo, what are these funds and what did you obtain from the EU?
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here. Of course, we are here to meet with several commissioners, including Commissioner Ferreira, Commissioner Hahn, also Vice President Dombrovskis. So the idea is to really get an extent of all the different solidarity tools that are available for Spain to face, as you said, the consequences of these huge natural disaster that we suffered on the 29th of October in Valencia with the floodings. So I think there are four main channels that we are exploring. One is, of course, the Solidarity Fund, which is there actually for specific for this purpose specifically. Then, of course, there is the Agricultural Reserve. There is the flexibility concerning the use of structural funds, cohesion funds as well. And there is also the reprogramming of next generation EU funds of our recovery plan. So we are trying to explore all those possibilities to really tap into EU solidarity. And the feedback that we get from the commissioners so far is a very good feedback, of course, in terms of really having the Commission on our side to help as much as possible.
So what is the amount of money that you obtained?
Well, it's a bit early to say, to have a fully fledged envelope of all the money that will be used from EU funds. So we're still now at the early stage, trying to first get an extent of the impact, because that will, of course, determine to how much money we have access to in the end as well. But I think these early stages are good for us to prepare, to get ready to really be quick in asking for those funds as quick as possible.
How much time do you think will be needed to overcome the effects of those floods?
Well, we need to rebuild, we need to reconstruct. So we're now at the early phase of the critical response, of early response, trying to get people back on their feet, but then we will need to reconstruct. So this will take long. So we are planning on actually getting side by side and getting to help citizens that were affected by this disaster as long as necessary. You know, there's this sentence by Mario Draghi, this is whatever it takes. So that's what the government is trying to instill into the minds of those affected now, to give them a bit of hope that we will be with them as long as it takes and with as many resources as are needed.
And do you think those have already an impact on Spain's GDP or will have an impact? How do you see the consequences on Spain's economy?
2024 GDP growth is almost closed now. We are almost at the end of the year, so I wouldn't expect a big impact in terms of 2024 GDP growth rate. We will see the full extent as we go along over the course of the next few weeks. How many businesses do actually have to put their daily operations on hold to rebuild, to reconstruct? We will see. In any case, so for you to have an idea, the area that was affected might represent around 1% of Spanish GDP. So let's see what the actual impact on this 1% of Spanish GDP is and for how long. And there we will have a final estimate.
Minister, as you know, the population in the region has protested against the lack of warning, but also the insufficient support from the regional government and from the central government. This has led to violence, I would say protest and violence. What, in your views, went wrong?
Well, as I just said, we are now very focused on responding to the current needs of the population. So there will be a time once we actually get out of this initial immediate response phase to look at political responsibilities and to draw lessons from them. But I think people would not understand us really fighting over each other at this point, while they're still in huge need of response and of help.
Yeah, but the anger was very strong in Spain. We have seen these protests. Even outside Spain, people were very shocked by the magnitude of what happened and the anger. So what do you respond to that?
Well, the anger first is understandable. Actually, you go there, you see the extent. I was there last week. The extent of the disaster, and you know that what you have to do is try to appease, try to lift them up again, and that's actually the whole political action now is concentrated, focused on putting together the resources that are necessary for them to go back to a normal life.
But the wound, as you said, was also an anger towards the lack of responsibility of the regional government. What do you say about that?
Well, again, I think there will be time for us to assign responsibilities, and in my personal opinion, that time has not come yet. So now it's a time for a quick response, and that's what I'm focused on, and that's what the government is also concentrating on.
So speaking of Spanish economy, we know the Spanish economy has shown very robust growth. You've said it many times on other TV channels, more than the Eurozone average. But we also know that the country is heavily reliant on tourism. And there were a lot of protests recently against mass tourism and the dire effects of tourism on prices, on a lot of different issues. So how would you strike a balance between the economical needs and the increase of tourism, which is a good thing for Spain, but also a balance with the Spanish purchasing power? How do you make people, how do you reassure people?
So Spain has been outperforming, as you said, the euro area. In 2023, we grew 6 times above the euro area average. And when you look at 24, it's around 4 times above the euro area average. And you look at Commission, IMF, OECD outlook for 2025, it is also foreseen that Spain will be above its peers. What we're witnessing now is that the record numbers in tourists are coming together with novel trends. One of them is that there is a diversification outside of summer months, what we call shoulder months. So just before or just after summer, those are the periods of time where there is a higher or larger increase in the number of tourists. And this, of course, is associated with more tourists inside Spain. So it's rural tourism associated with our gastronomy, something else than just sun and beach in the Spanish coast. So these are, I would say, good elements looking forward towards the sustainability of the current trend. Of course, we are aware that in some places this is creating tensions, and there is a need there, as you said, to find the proper balance so that these tensions in terms of the rental market, these tensions in terms of access to public services are actually well met, and also local citizens.
Spain has a real housing crisis.
Well,
so how
do
you respond to that?
Yes, we are, but that's overall in Spain, and it's also an EU threat or EU challenge. And I think, of course, Spain is not an exception on this. And what we are doing on this specific issue is dealing with or trying to deal with all the specific causes of the housing affordability issue, which have to do with supply. So we are rebuilding the public stock of housing, which was actually completely depleted after years of underinvestment. So that's one area. And then aside other measures, coming back to the tourism one, we're trying to also, to the extent possible, realign incentives for that supply of housing to go towards not only the tourism or the short-term market, but to longer-term rentals, so that can actually also affect and dampen the prices for these longer-term rentals, and therefore improve the affordability, not only for youngsters, which is an issue, but for the overall middle class.
And let me ask you a question that is a matter of concern here in the EU, and it's linked to the EU's decision to impose tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Spain made a sort of U-turn, let's say. It was in favor of tariffs, and then it lined up with Germany to call on the EU to reconsider these tariffs. We've seen Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez in China. Why this U-turn? And do you think these tariffs could be dangerous in the long term?
Well, I would go against your initial statement. There was no U-turn, and let me just explain why. So initially, of course, in Europe, we need to be open. We are an open economy and multilateralism, but that does not mean that we have to be naive in the way that we face international trade. Today is 2024, is not 2004, and we have to reconsider, or we have to consider this openness to the rest of the world in light of the strategic autonomy of the EU. And that has to do with strategic sectors such as the electric vehicle as well. So our companies needs to compete under equal conditions, under a level playing field with respect to other competitors, for example, Chinese cars that want to operate and sell in the EU. So the first step was to actually analyze, this was done by the Commission, to what extent there was actually a level playing field or not. And we supported that first step. And this is actually where we were before the summer. And after that, then, once there was a conclusion from the Commission that some tariffs would be needed to level out the playing field again with respect to Chinese cars, then we enter into a negotiating period where we have to negotiate from the EU with Chinese producers and with Chinese authorities to actually find a good compromise for everyone. And that's what we're saying. That's what President Sanchez is saying. That's what Chancellor Scholz was saying also. We need to keep on negotiating. We need to exhaust all negotiating avenues or talks so that we find this joint solution, because we know that the worst case scenario is a tit-for-tat scenario where there is an element of escalating protectionist measures that would be to the detriment of everyone.
Carlos Cuerpo, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.